Will Antifa ramp up its campaign of terror as the abortion rallies hit the streets? That's the question. We're going to take a look at a Jason Rantz article. He covers this topic very extensively here in Seattle. You'll see him on Fox News. Got an article by him. Got another article we're going to look at that I've already touched on in another podcast. It's what we're doing today, because not only are these the abortion rallies just had a weekend of thousands of people hitting the streets across the United States, we're also getting to that end of May time period where we had the first burst of the really big George Floyd, violence throughout the United States. We're at the 2-year anniversary mark of that coming up here in a couple of weeks. Is the whole abortion thing, people protesting in the streets, the whole time period where spring is a better time period for peaceful protesters to come out and bash windows and loot stores, right? Because it's warmer and, you can be out later at night. It's not so cold. I mean, you need conducive weather conditions to make all this happen. Now, I'm joking there, but it is actually true. I've read a number of accounts where, in the middle of winter, we don't have quite as many rallies. People, especially here in Washington where it's rainy and you want to go for multiple hours walking in the streets. Antifa has already got umbrellas, right? They've already got their black umbrellas. So they're all set. But the vast majority of people, it's 43 degrees and raining out. You want to go protest? Not so much. You got some of that going on. But we've got the conditions. We've got the right conditions for this to be happening, for Antifa to basically hijack the abortion movement. I mean, it's kind of what they did with the whole Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, it started off Black Lives Matter, ended up just a bunch of Antifa people doing their thing. And are we going to get back to that? That's the question of the hour. Some people think so. A lot of people just ignore the issue because, they can't really control it. So what are they going to do? What do we do here on News for Reasonable People? We talk about it. Shocking, I know. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies. I read the news. That's what we're doing. Antifa poses a greater threat to the community with pro-abortion rallies than it did during the Black Lives Matter protests. All right. Okay. A greater threat. Do I agree with that? I don't know. How about that for just a wildly non-committal answer? I don't know. Yeah. What do I think? I think that's a very good reality and that's why I'm doing this podcast, that this could be something down the road. Haven't seen it yet, and I thought we might have. We've seen little glimpses here and there. The one that we saw that we're going to take a quick look at is that we've got one situation where a Wisconsin anti-abortion group, they had basically a Molotov cocktail thrown in one of their windows, caused a bunch of damage, and Antifa left some messages, including all cops are bad. Okay, so violent Antifa activists are again active in Portland and Seattle, inspired by a leaked draft of the Supreme Court decision this week, which reverses Roe versus Wade. It's a rough draft at this point in time. We don't really know what the end result is going to be, but it looks like the Supreme Court is poised to overthrow that decision that's been kind of on the ropes. That decision has been on the ropes since its inception in 1973. You've always heard about this. Well, if Roe v. Wade gets overthrown, I mean, if you're an adult, you've been living with this for, I guess it's coming up on, it's 50, pretty close to 50 years, because I'm 53 and I'm born in 68 and this happened in 73. So there's math, right? Neither city is ready for a repeat of Black Lives Matter inspired left-wing riots and vandalism, but Antifa is now more dangerous than ever. They might be, but the cops also know to just be on top of them as well. The problem there is, if we have a big event like this happen in Seattle, the rest of the citizens not involved in the protest, they have something bad happen to them. Good luck with that. Your 911 call is going to take forever to get a cop to respond. Because even down in Portland last year, you had 90 homicides. You had 12 or 1,400 shootings. That's a lot of manpower going to that kind of thing, right? And when you've got a lot of manpower going to crazy left-wing riots and vandalism, then the rest of the city, falls short with public safety. You don't have enough cops to go around. Again, I go back to math. Not enough cops? Okay, well, we're going to send some here and some there. You guys over here experiencing this, sorry about that. We'll get back to you later. Maybe. Sometime. Antifa operates most effectively during left-wing movements where they rely on partisan media outlets and like-minded politicians to either justify or ignore their violence. That's what we saw a lot of during the 2020 and 21 stuff, right? We just ignored it. And by we, I mean, I didn't. I talked about it a lot. I was there at a bunch of them, but the vast majority of people are like, yeah, they're just, they're just doing their thing. And those are folks on the left. They just didn't say much because they're affiliated with the far left. It's kind of like people on the right talking about what happened in Buffalo. Horrible, terrible. It's a example of a far right person affiliated with the far right. Yeah. What can you say other than, that guy's been caught. He's in custody. He'll have to face the justice system, and it is what it is, right? I mean, that's just what's going to happen. But as far as the stuff that happened and bashing of the windows and the looting and the rioting that wasn't peaceful, just ignored all that. The left just ignored all that, and it just happened. So that's why we're kind of wondering, all right, is this going to go on? Are we going to have round 2 here? Because this is one of those events where you certainly could. It's one reason why they pose an enormous threat as pro-abortion activists take to the streets to protest a Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. In 2020, after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Antifa extremists exploited the Black Lives Matter movement. They viciously attacked cops and their political opponents, even murdering one. That was down in Oregon. That guy went on the run, and he got killed in southern Washington in a shootout with ATF, I think it was. I can't remember who it was. They destroyed property and took communities hostage with self-governing autonomous zones. That's Seattle. Yay, CHOP. Famous. Infamous. Yeah, that was not good. They faced little resistance from Black Lives Matter activists and politicians who benefited politically from the violence. Okay, but now the table has turned. Now that party is in office facing some very difficult midterm elections, and probably facing some very difficult elections in 2024 in the presidential elections. So now the onus is on, we kind of need to keep this. We need to keep the status quo, and letting these kind of riots and these kind of things happen. It's kind of like the tail end of when all this was going on in 2020 and 2021. People on the left side of things are like, this isn't the greatest look for our image. The optics on this, they're long overdue for, we need to stop this stuff. I mean, and that happened. So I think folks that are familiar with what goes on in Seattle and familiar with what goes on in Portland, they're kind of bracing themselves, because this would be a perfect opportunity. Whether it actually happens, I'm still kind of like at a 50-50, because I would have thought last weekend when we had throughout the United States, thousands and thousands of people went out there and marched in support of Roe versus Wade to try and get the Supreme Court to maybe change its mind on overturning this ruling. But we'll just have to see what happens. And in the meantime, this is an opportunity that folks on the far left would typically take an advantage of. So haven't seen it yet. We've seen a little bit of undertones. But when it does happen, I'll cover it. I was ready to go to the protest last weekend, had all my stuff ready to roll, do a little live stream there. But it was peaceful, and police had a pretty good sized presence, especially here in Seattle, as far as I can understand. And we didn't have any shenanigans. We didn't have any block shenanigans. The goal was to intimidate progressive politicians and silence opposition in order to defund and eventually abolish the police. That was the goal of the last one. This one, it's not quite as conducive to the whole goals of Antifa, because getting rid of the police, that's right in line with, calling the police fascists, right? So you get rid of them, anti-fascism, Antifa, that all makes sense. The abortion thing, a little outside of the realm, but still well within the, hey, we could peacefully protest, and then when that peaceful protest is done, we'll do our thing. That's kind of what I'm expecting to see happen. I haven't really seen that happen so far, but give it enough time, because how long is the Supreme Court going to take to give us their answer on this or get us a little further down the road into what's going on? I don't know. I have no idea. I got a feeling the pressure is being put on to make up their mind one way or the other. Police departments in the Pacific Northwest never recovered, and now there's the resurgence of Antifa. We may be in store for mostly peaceful riots this spring and summer. That could happen. Again, I'm like, I don't know, maybe. I could see it happening, but I don't feel as strongly about Antifa going out and doing their thing on this one, as it was totally obvious they were all on board with the defund the police and all the craziness that came out of that, right? That was more in line with their ideology. So this is basically where we sit. And we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to hear the Supreme Court, what they're going to come out with. Got that rough draft out there. And of course, those who are pro-abortion are saying that this basically, there's 26 states that are going to be immediately overturning, banning all abortions. Well, we don't really know that. I mean, they're basically saying, well, these states, it appears they might do this. We don't really know that. We don't really know what the full tilt action of the Supreme Court is going to be. It looks like they're going to overthrow it. Well, we don't know what these states are going to do. This is not overthrowing Roe v. Wade. This is handing the decision of that court case basically back to the states, letting them decide, hey, you guys decide. You figure out what you're doing. So you're going to have some states that are going to, like Wisconsin, like we talked about, they're probably, day one going to just put an absolute ban in place because that's where they sit on this issue. So you're going to have a bunch of states that are going to be like that. My state here, Washington, I'll be able to have an abortion through the nuclear war. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just how we sit politically. So this is going to give, the progressive activists, Antifa, the ability to go out and do their thing, especially if this drags out long enough. The one storyline that was difficult to watch was you had a Republican candidate, a governor candidate, do a little rally in Portland. Police weren't there. Antifa basically pushed them out. They threw some poop on their bus, I believe. Standard stuff. And from that standpoint, okay, yeah, that's not good. That's not good. But that's different than 1,000, person per rally. You had a couple of dozen people show up to the political rally in Portland, where you've got one candidate, talking to a handful of people that are there. That's different than a nationwide galvanizing event like, abortion possibly being overturned at the Supreme Court level and handing that decision back to the states. That I could see a lot of folks turning out and things getting pretty sideways. So from that standpoint, that's where my 50% says, yeah, I think Antifa might get a little bit more active here. That would be, but maybe it's a little bit further down the road here. Maybe it's June, something like that. I don't know. Gonna have to see again. I don't know. These are all guesses, obviously. And these are guesses on, the folks that are writing these articles that are coming out right now. Antifa certainly could do their thing and certainly could. But with the way politics sit right now today, wouldn't be a good look. Because then you got, broken windows, you got graffitied up buildings, kind of going in the wrong direction of where we're trying to head with a lot of these cities right now. We're trying to get back in the game with having businesses bring people back to the downtowns. You have a whole another, bunch of these unchallenged, peaceful protests that end in, $2 billion worth of damage throughout the United States. That's not a good look. And from that standpoint, that's where I kind of think, that's where the con is, pro versus con, how Antifa would maybe, accelerate in this environment. I think the hammer might be dropped on them a little bit in today's political environment where we sit. So that's what I'm thinking on this. Will Antifa rear its ugly head and do its thing? 50-50. I think 50-50. We'll just have to see. I think they'll rear their ugly head to a certain extent. It won't be full tilt like it was before. And that's if they do. They love a good protest. And I think we will have a bunch of good protests come out of this. This is one of those things. One of those things growing up, you always heard about people protesting Roe v. Wade. Like, really? They're protesting on that? Is it really going to do anything? You protested against the Vietnam War and that changed that war, right? I mean, that was just ugly. That was brutal. Brutal. Will this happen on Roe v. Wade? Yeah, again, I would think so. Just based on history, I would think so. We're going to have a whole bunch of protests and people are going to get pretty worked up. But then the secondary thing is, does Antifa step in and hijack the movement to whatever extent? And that's where I'm like, there's a decent chance. I wouldn't say high probability. I would say a probability. That's where I sit with my really wishy-washy feelings on this. And that's why I'm doing it, because we haven't seen it yet. We've had some protests. All right. We've had a couple of examples of, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. All right. But that's one example out of what's happening all across the country with these protests going on. So it's not like it's an every city kind of event. You know what I mean? So that's where we sit. That's where I sit on this one. Yeah, maybe. Solid maybe. How's that? Am I going to get a raise? Solid maybe. How'd you like to have that at your next employee review? Probably. Thanks for being here. We'll catch up soon. Talk then. Bye for now.